Welcome to the Truth Over Comfort show. Today's guest is Johnny Vedmore, who I'm very pleased to have him here today to talk everything Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, the network around them, and of course his research all around it. And I'm sure many people he's going to name that you've never heard of, including myself. But it's great to have you here today, Johnny. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here. Happy to be with you. Happy to talk about this stuff. Talking Epstein's a really weird thing because, like, is probably about I would say really like high level researchers, probably about 5, 6, 7 high level Epstein researchers, and they all got obsessed with their own little bits. Everybody's got their own little take on it. Everybody's got their own bits of knowledge. I tried to spread my knowledge of Epstein across all of his operations, and so I hope I can answer the majority of your questions. But yeah, you will hear new names. This is something I dig underneath. So while everybody else is screaming client list, I'm like, well, who will be on that list? Let's make the list ourselves. So that's my type of research in it. So ready, let's go. Let's do some Epstein stuff.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. I mean, there is definitely a few researchers who probably look into it, and obviously with all the mystery around the case due to the lack of accountability and releasing names, documents, everything. So obviously at the moment we keep getting these drip-fed court documents, stuff even previous to when he was arrested, of the names and, as you said, the client list and this list we keep hearing about. But as I was saying to you before the show, people like you, Jason Burmis, point to all this other evidence that was collected at the time of his arrest by the FBI that they're sitting on, that tells you everything you need to know, I guess, about how the American justice system works and who they really kind of protect. So could you just lay out the evidence that we kind of know the FBI and other agencies have taken, but we hear nothing about except, these drip-fed names, and it doesn't necessarily mean they actually was an associate of him or there was a paedophile. They could just be, these little names brought up in documents like we've seen recently, which kind of provides all this misinformation where every celebrity is a paedophile when that's not necessarily the case. So what is the evidence that we know they have outside of these drip-fed kind of names and court documents, which seems to be the same names?
Yeah, the reason why they've given you those names, the reason why the last Epstein file dump and the unredactions, or what you de-redactions, I don't know how you say it, as they're unredacting these documents, they're unredacting the documents that we've already heard being reported on in the press. We've already heard over and over again. When I was researching for One Nation Under Blackmail on Volume 2, there was going to be a section which was about basically the victims. And when I was put in charge of researching that and the blackmail operation itself. Some of the Jewish groups that Wexner was handling too, and some other things. But the actual information I got was from court documents that were redacted, but we knew who it was anyway. Everybody knew who was, like, how their story was, because the witnesses, the victims, everybody involved has said their piece out loud by this point, and it's been reported by loads of different people, like the Daily Beast, Kate Brickellett, and some others were reporting lots of these snippets of information. So we knew all of the stuff that come out. We knew already all the stuff they're showing you. We already knew existed. So this is like that we found out it existed. They talked about it loads. No one really read the articles. They just went, ooh. No one ever reads articles, right? The majority of people look at the headline, look at the first few lines, and like, I know everything about the case now, and they don't actually look into it properly. And if they do, they would see that there's actually lots of details that mean you can work out that that was Virginia Giuffre talking about Alan Dershowitz, or etc. When they talk about I had to sleep with this Harvard professor, and at the same time they're out in Dershowitz in an affidavit by Maria Farmer and other people. This is coming. Now what you don't realize is coming is Virginia Giuffre withdrawing her allegations, later. You don't see that coming. These sort of sleight of hands. What was the point of making the accusation in the first place if you can later on are going to withdraw it? And that's very interesting, because what they're doing is damage limitation, drawing in, drawing out, drawing in, drawing out. Now, I'll explain later how a lot of these named victims co-opted as part of a obvious CIA operation that started in 2013, 2014, when the FBI turned up in Australia to interview Virginia Giuffre for the first time. And then she made her way back in 2014 to the arms of Bradley Edwards, to start the case, to be central, one of the central figures. There was already someone else on board. There was a couple of named victims that were coming up. And these are all named victims. These are all people who have said their names. We know lots of their details. We've seen the flight logs. So a lot of what the information you're allowed to see are all of those things. And not everybody on the flights will be a dirty, rotten paedophile who loves throwing babies out of planes or whatever, whatever sort of grotesque image they can make of it, which is part of the circus of an operation, really, of an intelligence operation, a disinformation and malinformation, misinformation swirling around in a big ball. So you don't know what you do know is that you had the address book. The address book was full of names, details, circles around some of them. It was apparently made by the housekeeper, and the housekeeper decided, this is a name that you need to know. This is a name, and it's believed that it may have been he was saying who was round the house, who he had personally seen round the house. So they had circled, and that's probably 358 El Brillo Way in Palm Beach, which is just down the road from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s compound, and just across the way from Stanley Pottinger, who goes to Bradley Edwards, the victim's lawyers, in 2014, and becomes part of the case as well. 500 meters away from Jeffrey Epstein's house is where he lives. There's a whole, all of these names of the flight logs, all these names in the address book, all of these names from the court documents. These are what you are allowed to know, but you're not allowed to know the details. So I went through a lot of the address book and flight manifest with some of my audience, and we did a bit of a live where I could go through, and we could, because my point is and was that this is the client list. This is the client list. The people who are going to meet Epstein go to meet Epstein for a certain reason. He seems to be a fixer, an interlocutor. He works partially, and this is how the operations, it was very Operation Condor-like. I think he was CIA, and he was funded through the Israeli state more than anything, and Israeli actors, so that they could then, the CIA could say, oh no, he was a foreign agent, rather than he's domestic, working domestically, because you're not allowed to. That's one of the big things. The CIA are not allowed to run domestic operations that easily. And if they are, then they need to look like the funding's coming from elsewhere. And what you're seeing is what you see is a lot of people who get on those planes seem to be linked with the CIA. A lot of the people who are in the address book seem to be linked with the CIA. And so you start to see that it's not just a sexual compromise operation. He's not just a sex pest, sex fiend, even though he is very much a sex pest, sex fiend. And 99.9% of the sexual offenses were committed by Epstein himself. So all of those many girls, it's not like they were just taken in and they were sold off to loads of different people or anything. The majority of the sexual crimes in the Epstein operation were people grooming local girls so he could have his 2.5 at least massages a day. 2 to 3 massages a day is what he wanted. And if you think of that over a 10-year period, that's 8,000 separate cases of abuse. So his offending was off the charts. But everybody who went into those houses, all the people on the list, all of the people who went on the plane, they weren't necessarily all going for sex rendezvous with 12-year-old girls or 13-year-old girls or 14-year-old girls. They were usually neurotypical adults who could be groomed in a sexual blackmail operation by a girl who's 17, 18, 19, 20, and there was a lot of them around. And this is where we get into the operation. So first of all, the client list This idea of you asked what evidence are we not seeing, what things are we not including that the FBI have put in there? Well, that's nearly everything. Every bit of evidence they took that they could hide from us, they've hidden from us. A lot of it will have to be gone through carefully and destroyed, and they'll be investigating. And in a sense, this is like a systems-based, like Dr. Shiva calls it, the swarm. This is the way it happens. An agency gets control of information that can be used as collateral. What do? Give it up to the people so everybody can see it and know the truth? No, they use it as collateral. And then they go to other departments that can potentially use those as collateral, and then use that collateral for other departments to get them to do other things. And you have this swarm. You have this, everybody's not really breaking the law because nobody really knows what they've got, and everybody can, you can deny. But there's going to be loads of information there, and they'll vet it and go through it carefully. So every time you do have a little bit of information come out, something about bankers or Noam Chomsky or whatever like that, that's because they filtered that through and said, okay, we can express it like this, and that's how people will take in that information. So it's careful, leak out certain information, but they're not going to leak you out. They're not going to give you sex tapes of a leader unless it makes sense for every agency involved to have a bit of that pie or to destroy that person. So I think there's loads that we could see coming in the future, but the likelihood that we're going to see the majority of the evidence at all ever, like maybe 75, 100 years time, they'll uncover a box in the Indiana Jones warehouse of things, and they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, all of the pictures and videos from CDs from the FBI for Jeffrey Epstein. There's just no way that they're going to show the public, because look at what the public does. The more evidence that you show the public, this is from their view, not necessarily from my view, like, show everything and be done, in my view. But for their view, it's look at what the public does. They bathe for the blood of everyone. And if you give them information, like really horrible, terrible, stark information about people, they will paint all of the people attached to that person as the same person as well, and so on and so forth. And that will lead to, some actions happening. That will lead to something happening because people are really angry about this. But what you've got to understand, and what a lot of people have to understand, is that a lot of these people are a very small group. Again, referring to Dr. Shiva and his swarm, I talked to him recently. He's on the most recent Newspace podcast that's coming out on Thursday, and he explains system science really well. And a lot of these people are all in the same network. You go to New York in the early 80s, and Jeffrey Epstein is the center of a load of names, big names, and they're all getting a bit of the pie, and they're all connected with him. And so it makes sense for the swarm to protect itself. It makes sense for all of these different elements to be looking in and say, well, we better not mention Epstein, because otherwise we're all in this trouble together, because it's a very small network. So yeah, I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you definitely answered the question there. And as I said to you before the show, Jason Burmis, he's gone over it. But I think it's the New York Post article, and it's basically about what the FBI took. And there's CDs, hard drives, and just binders and binders full of obviously information.
Binders full of women, as Mitt Romney would say.
And he also had a safe which includes hard drives, so I'm guessing even more sensitive information there. So the FBI has all of that information. We get these leaked names and the court documents, and we hear the same names pretty much every time: Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, and then you get the occasional Bill Gates chucked in, but that's kind of more under discussed. That's more from New York Times kind of articles that's brought that to attention. You get Bill Richardson, and then other names, but it's always Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, I guess, are the face of this now. But obviously there's all that evidence that's getting sat on. And just going back to what you said there, so obviously the FBI or some agency has access to this. I'm guessing someone went through it all and watched it. Do they use that now as leverage, so they have it in their custody and they could, like you said, go to someone and say, we can leak certain bits of information that will scapegoat you or put you in trouble if you don't do this or you're not playing ball. Do you think there's an element that they're going to use it for themselves? You'd think they would. I mean,
I don't think it'd be that simple. I don't think I don't think you need to be that simple. The people involved, when you've been hanging around with someone guilty, yeah, you feel guilty yourself when you discover that they're guilty and the world knows that they're guilty. You feel guilty, and you know that you've got some association and people could develop on that themselves, and then you fear anything coming out. Any connection is negative connection. So the FBI doesn't even have to say out loud to any of these people, the swarm protects itself naturally. It does it all on its own. It doesn't even need to use the leverage.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned there, and I know this is a silly question, but I think with big cases like Jeffrey Epstein or wars, when it's kind of been and done, it's been a few years. It's like the Iraq War. Everyone thinks everyone remembers it, how it was, everyone knows it. They kind of skip the basic details. So can you just lay out, first of all, you researched obviously the blackmail side. So for people who have forgotten or never, kind of wasn't there at the time, or people like me who obviously 22, who may have not looked at it properly at the time, what is kind of the evidence of the blackmail operation? Because, there's obviously discussions, one of what I just said, the hard drives, the CDs, the binders, also, his certain rooms being equipped with cameras. Is this open source information that's been released by the FBI since, or is this sources going to, the newspapers? What do we actually know that suggests this is a blackmail operation?
What do we actually know? Yeah, because a lot of it, and a lot of the rumors of cameras in every room always comes from a source somewhere that you can't quite get a grasp of. I've got one of those myself. Within one of my series, a guy who came to me and told me a beautiful story that was completely provable in over many parts, but I wasn't there, so I am unable to know if what he said about cameras is true. And the same can be said about I think again it was an old New York Post article that talked about Jeffrey Epstein's house, and it mentions that it has cameras in every room, which is quite strange. And there was a lot of talk about there was a lot of speculation, and Maria Farmer, whose word doesn't hold water with me because I know a lot of other information about her, she really expanded on it. She said, there was much more going on all of the time. So you have to get from the one end of the spectrum where you don't have much evidence, and the other end where you've got a fair bit of evidence. You got to say, what was the blackmail operation? What did it look like? Well, there's a lot of people who see it in different ways, and there's nuance to it. So number one, most of the girls, don't get that mixed up with the grooming operation, because most of the girls who were being groomed for Jeffrey Epstein. The high level groom, if you go through grooming girls at that rate, you're getting one girl to bring you 50 to 70 girls. So one of the girls says in documents that she was 50. I think Haley Robeson says she brought 50 to 70 girls of between the ages of 13 and 17 to Jeffrey Epstein, or 13 and 16, I think it was, to Jeffrey Epstein during that period. If you've got that sort of operation going along, you're lots of girls are coming in all of the time, and the ones who could actually be involved in operations and could be trained up to that level were very few, because the majority of girls were being abused in a way that they would mentally cut off and not be able to develop mentally. So a lot of the girls would have had stunted educational growth during those periods, would have had problems taking things in, but going through that systematic abuse, Epstein and Maxwell would be able to identify the girls who they could use. And then they would bring them in. For instance, the girl I mentioned, Ropes, I think her first name's Haley. She was to give him a massage. He tried to touch her up, and she said, "No, I'm not interested in any of that," because she defended herself. She said, "That's simple." They were like, "Okay, well, we can see that you," this is me supposing, "we can see that you are not into that, but you will do other things that are outside ethical or moral boundaries, and you can be convinced of other things." And they groomed her to go and groom other people and bring them in. And she would get money for each of those. So she was making money. She was happy with that operation. She could drop her even as a child, it's hard to say how much you're responsible for, but she could drop her ethics and morals down to that level on that front. But she didn't want to massage him, and she would say no. And they weren't interested in girls who would say no, because what they wanted was, they were looking for two different types of girls: the girls who would just do what they're told, and the girls who could interact and go to the next level. And they were very few and far between. So you could say Virginia Giuffre is definitely on that level. She worked high level within the operation. She knows what's going on. She understands what's happening. She's there when she's 16, 17. But then she's 18, 19. She's an adult. She understands. She's working out what's going on. You can't deny it. And that then gets really complicated, of course. But that's what they were looking for. They were looking for these girls who could, like Sarah Kellen. Most of these girls had suffered abuse before. So I've explained that Sarah Kellen, if you say, oh, you try and give her any excuse for her behavior, everybody wants to shout at you. But I'm not excusing her behavior. What I am doing is looking at the beginning of their life. And she was in a Jehovah family, and she was forced to marry a guy called Noah Bonk, I think his name is, in Hawaii, very early on. When she was about, I think she might have even been 15, 16. She was that young. And she got caught taking pictures of herself in a bikini, or someone taking pictures of her in a bikini, and the whole family ousted her and basically said she had taken naked pictures, went to the extremes, and the church turned against her. So she was 17 years old, and suddenly she gets offered a job, and goes for an interview and gets a job with Epstein. She actually returns to Hawaii to be served divorce papers from this Noah Bonk on the Lolita Express. Like, she gets the papers and goes back in again. So she became part of the operation. Virginia Giuffre had been abused beforehand. There was lots of girls who they had been abused, but then they'd realized that, okay, now I'm on my own. I've got to make something of my life. They've turned around and they get given this big opportunity. And if they were able to, they could be part of the party boat. And a lot of people talk about this party boat idea, to do with this. You get on the party boat, you're part of the party boat, you can't get off the party boat. That's basically compromise. That's the type of compromise, because we want it to be blackmail, but it's not quite blackmail. There's a lot of other things. There's nuance to it, really. People, there's other things. It's not as simple as them saying, you've got to do this, or we're going to tell people about this information. The people, like I say earlier, they don't want their associations to get out, or someone else to be negative, shed a negative light on them because of their associations. They know that it's best that everybody looks like gold, everybody looks good, because otherwise they're in trouble. So there's that party boat idea. One of the cases I worked on was looking at Nicole Younkerman, and Nicole Younkerman was an extremely interesting lady. She was, by the time I was looking into her in 2018, 19, she was in a company called Carbine 9/11, which was headed by Ehud Barak, the 10th Prime Minister of Israel, Pinchas Bugris, who used to be head of the IDF, and a load of other Unit 8200 and Mossad creatures. These guys, they're just like some of the worst of the worst. So she was interesting. She was in the NHS. She had got into the NHS Health Tech Advisory Board. It was about introducing health technology to the NHS. So that really got me up. She was involved in FIFA corruption. She was having an affair with the head of Adidas. It was just amazing. She had like a dramatic story. She used to be elite models at the time when Naomi Campbell was an elite model back in the mid-90s. And she had flown on the Lolita Express. And that was amazing. I mean, it turned out later, I found out later that Epstein had actually been invested in Carbine 9/11 as well. So along with Peter Thiel. So this woman was obviously, you know, very interesting. But that was investment much later when she flew on the Lolita Express. It was 2002. It was August the 31st and they flew back out on the 2nd. And there's really important context to be added, and you can learn a lot from the occasion, because it was one of the only times where Epstein's flying just with somebody else who isn't in his entourage, and there's no entourage involved. And they fly from Paris to Birmingham, and I was just like, you come to Birmingham in the UK, I want to know what you're doing. And it's Nicole Youngkerman as well, why not? And I eventually found out she had gone to Foxcote House in Warwickshire, in North Warwickshire, which is very close to Birmingham. And they had flown there by Bristow's helicopter. The house was owned by Abigail Wexner, of course, Les Wexner's wife. And there was 2 senators there and a load of Secret Service. They had a load of ex-cops, former cops. They had various people at the house, which meant I was able to eventually find one of the people who had been at the house. I won't say which one it is, because that person was like, never mention who I am, please. So I have made promises, but the story told me I could get information about that from other sources. So it was a very interesting. They turn up, they meet these senators. Epstein walks into the house with Nicole Youngkerman on one arm and a brunette on the other. I probably reckon it's Melanie Walker, in my opinion, who's on the other arm, the brunette. This was during a period that was very important. It was 3 days later was the reforming of the Senate. And the Senate would be, first thing it'd be voting on, well, it's actually the second thing, but it was the first day, was on the Amber Alert bill, which was about child trafficking warnings in America. So I wonder if Epstein had a dog in that fight. But more importantly, a month later, it was coming up to the vote on the Iraq War. And remember, Epstein's a kingmaker.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, just the information discussing there up until you found someone who was there. Where's that source from? Just out of interest, was it this from an article? How did you kind of find out? Where did you read about this meeting to then find the person to then fill in a few more gaps?
Well, I had written the first article, the IDF-linked Bond girl. I can't remember what the full article's called. Nicole Youngkerman. Yeah, the IDF-linked Bond girl infiltrating the UK's NHS, and that had got round to quite a fair few people, and someone contacted me because they were balls deep in watching the Epstein case, because they had met Epstein. They were just like so extremely excited, and where I was trying to find out where he had gone, and I basically put out feelers on platform, and I had a conversation, a meeting, and then a load of other things that happened. So that's where it came from. And then the second piece was written about a month after the first piece, and that's where I reveal. And I do state clearly, you know, you've got to all of it made perfect sense. All of it made, you know, what was happening at the time. I couldn't even imagine where he had gone. I didn't know Abigail Wexner had a mansion at Foxcote House. You know, it led me to knowing certain details that I could verify for sure, that said, right, the guy seems to be telling me the truth. And the story he told me, if I told you the details of it, you'd go, oh, you know, it's kind of like you have to accept that when it's a story like that, with nearly every article I write is heavily sourced. with that article, I had to put in the reference of, like, at the end of the day, I am going from what a source has told me about part of this article.
How do you when you get in touch with a source, or a source gets in touch with you like that one? How do you verify? Obviously, you have to take his word for it in actual conversations there. But how do you verify? Do you check? Is there any open source information this person is connected to here, and he did work here? How do you verify this person's not part of an intelligence operation for misinformation? How do you know that?
Well, there's two things. Number one, I can't be certain. I felt, and I still feel now, that it was like, okay, so let me actually answer the first thing. Number one, he gave me his name. I was able to check who he was. I was able to verify things in the past that he said he had done. And so everything seemed to roll out into a ball. I had basically, I went through a process of verifying who he was as an actual person. And he allowed me to do that. And I then went back and used my own tools to look into that person. The other thing is that afterwards, probably about a few months afterwards, I felt like there was something wrong with that. I felt that someone coming to find me like that, the chances would be really slim. Now, it made much more sense, and because I talked to him on a few occasions, I felt fairly comfortable that he felt like he was telling me the truth about the whole thing. But the only thing I couldn't get over was the coincidence, or at least the happenstance, that he would read my article. But he did claim that he was reading everything about Epstein, and fair dues, if I had met Jeffrey Epstein and then all this Epstein stuff was coming out and I found out about it, I'd probably keep track of it too. But I got a feeling that it might have been a way for the British authorities to get out information so they could distance themselves from it in a different way, get it out in a different way. It's really hard to talk about this because I don't want to give away who the person is, basically. But you have to take with certain articles. I mean, like with nearly all my articles, you'll go through every single second line has a source nowadays. That's not always possible. Sometimes you've got to protect a source. You've got to, especially in these cases, because it is fair to be scared of intelligence coming at you, basically.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess the problem of being in the independent media. When the mainstream media come out with an investigative piece with sources, most people just take their word for it. But when someone in the independent media has a source, you're like, you're a little bit suspicious, and you're like, how have they got that, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so you mentioned obviously Leslie Wexner there. People probably haven't really heard his name too much in this case unless you follow it. So who's he? What was he up to, and what was his kind of role within the Jeffrey Epstein network? And then after that, just if you could actually just stick to that first, and then we can circle back. But yeah, who's Leslie Wexner? What was the company he ever created or headed? And what were his links to Jeffrey Epstein? And also suspicions, obviously, that he may have been, very involved with the fact that he got kind of immunity. And this, you can lay out better than me. So
incredible man. You have to say he's an incredible man, incredibly weird man. His father ran a clothes shop, and he was working for his father, and he must have been about 16, 17, 18 or something, where he started giving his father advice, and his father wouldn't take his advice. And eventually he basically went and opened a competing clothes shop to his father's and ran his father's business out of business, basically made his father have to go, and then he bought up his father's business and he took it over. And he's an amazing mind, a very weird person, a guy who in one article goes on about how he has a book, a little demon that sits on his shoulder and tells him what to do, and he's always got to do the most evil thing. I mean, he says some of the most bizarre stuff. Not get distracted by that. Leslie Wexner's rise is emblematic of the sort of modern Jewish story in America, the post-World War II Jewish story, because not only was he enterprising and made a lot of money within business, but there was the necessity to keep America on side with Israel and continuing to support Israel. What lots of people don't realize is that the CIA, when it was formed, was actually a very anti-Zionist organization. The heads like Kermit Roosevelt, Virginia Gildersleeve, Dorothy Thompson, people like that who were working in the CIA, they were all extremely anti-Zionist, and they were devastated by the Truman saying recognizing Israel, etc. And it was only in about 1967 where things flipped. But things had flipped because on the ground, Jewish groups had organized so thoroughly. And Les Wexner's really, when I say emblematic of that movement, he was right in the center, involved in getting Jewish groups together, forming membership groups that could then lobby for Israel in general. And he learned a lot during that time. Of course, they made a lot of connections, so he continued to make money, and his businesses got bigger. So he started Limited Brand, and the Limited is a very interesting. I mean, he started selling what was called, I don't know, it's tween clothing or whatever, young girls of probably a younger than what Jeffrey Epstein would prefer, but around that age and younger, provocative sort of clothing that really, I mean, just captivated girls. You know what girls are like. They always want to wear the new thing that's trending. And he was really ahead of that. He realized that values were dropping and that he could get on that bandwagon. So through the 70s and 80s, he was developing really close ties with different businessmen. And what he wanted more than anything was to really get out of Ohio and go to New York and be on the New York scene. Now, during that time, there's lots going on in New York, but Epstein is central. In 81, he's funding and helping to fund and run arms through Iran-Contra, along with Adnan Khashoggi, Cyrus Hashemi, and Stanley Pottinger, who he'll live close to and will later represent the Epstein victims, is also in that operation during that time. And all of this New York elite, these bankers, they all go into banking. Pottinger and Cyrus Hashemi have a bank together. Epstein's off banking. And the boom's happening. They're making loads of money off everybody else's work. And by the time Leslie Wexner enters onto the New York scene, it's like 86, 87, and he's just ready to invest and get involved in this. And it's around that time that he meets Epstein. I know a really good general basis for Les Wexner, but there's people who can go into much finer detail about these periods. But basically, I'm giving you the quick guide to it. Les Wexner and him meet. And soon after, I mean, Robert Maxwell is doing the same thing as Les Wexner. He's coming to be anointed into the New York set, which is the most powerful set in the world at this point. Everybody wants to be part of it. They're making money galore in New York, and they all want to be involved. So this becomes a mix. All of the different people who were involved in Epstein's operation are all swimming in the same tank around 87 to 89. And Les Wexner basically takes on Epstein. Now, whether this is because the people who Epstein's running guns with in Iran-Contra isn't only Mossad operations going on there. There's CIA operations, clearly CIA-run operations. The whole of the October surprise that was attached to it was William Casey, who would be the head of the CIA, and other people meeting in Spain over a few month period, over a couple of months. And there's so much CIA involved there. So Epstein's obviously mixed in with this circle. And and this really leads to then the Les Wexner becoming Epstein's money man. Now, lots of people want to say, "Oh, that's because he's the Mossad," and that's just so simplistic. That's what if people can see the similarities to Operation Condor when you see multinational intelligence agency operations happening, but they don't put into why Operation Condor existed. It was so that they could blame the other people while doing the thing and funding through a certain arm. So I really feel like there was an operation at this time for Israel and America to both fund each other's operations, and that's why Les Wexner was trusted with funding what was essentially a CIA heavy interlocutor for other intelligence agencies around the world. And so then it's not a surprise that he meets Maxwell, because Maxwell's in his time has been working for the Czech intelligence, German intelligence, French intelligence, Canadian intelligence, heavily with British intelligence, and is entering into the center of the American intelligence scene with a big smile on his face, a load of money in the bank still. Well, at least people think there's money in the bank, but in actual fact, it's all stolen bonds, and it's all about to catch up with him. It's a maelstrom of potential for Epstein, and this is where his operation is born. It's where he teams up with Maxwell, and Ghislaine Maxwell's really important because that moment is a moment of synthesis. I see it as two preferential pedophiles, sadistic preferential pedophiles, really a small fraction of pedophiles, sadistic preferential pedophiles. When they find each other and they both recognize each other, that's usually really dangerous for everybody around them. And that's what happened there. Ghislaine Maxwell had been brought up in a very strange way. She'd had very strange experiences throughout her life, and it made her very messed up. And when she met Epstein, she realized he was perfect for her, and that she could use him in a way that he would enjoy and he would know. And they could, in a sense, it'd probably be a state of hypernormalization where they both know what they're doing to each other and love it and are satisfied by it and get a burst. So by this point then, Epstein's got his investment from Wexner, got the Maxwell money lingering around in the background. He's able to start operating and increasing that wealth. It's if you have all of this money to invest and you know how to invest it, you can increase the wealth. So even though he's first funded by Wexner, I think eventually he can become very independent because of that influx of wealth. Loads of crossovers about Wexner. Wexner has loads of links to Harvard, especially later on. Clinton Initiative is obviously based at Harvard. Wexner was based at Harvard until fairly recently. The whole New World Order is hanging around at Harvard for the past 75 years, so it's not a real surprise. The German Marshall Funds there, all of these sort of organizations that don't seem linked until you realize they've come from the same birth, the creation of Israel, really. Even though that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all a Mossad project. It's loads of intelligence agents working in unison, of course, with all these organizations. But this all come from this birth of Israel has spawned the necessity to organize, and then the ability to get funding for organize, because there was so much money being thrown at Israel for compensation, including from the lobbying of the German Marshall Fund by Guido Goldman, whose father was Nahum Goldman, who was one of the founders of modern Israel and one of the leading Zionist minds in the world. So Harvard, and where all of these guys ended up, was really like a melting pot of Zionists. Really. So it's not a surprise they're all hanging around there. Wexner became less important to Epstein later on and distanced himself from Epstein later on. Of course, he had to, and he's never been held accountable for anything. There were a load of rumors that he was actually into young boys and all of this. None of that has been seen as proven. I've not seen any evidence apart from people who I've learned have lied about loads of other things. So I can no longer trust it. So he's don't get me wrong, He's an evil man who says he's got a demon on his shoulder that tells him to do the worst things in the world.
And was he the CEO, or did he found Victoria's Secret?
Yeah, I think he founded it, and then I would assume he continued to be CEO afterwards. And Victoria's Secret is obviously, like many of his stuff, it's all sexual. You know, he started off sexualizing kids, but then eventually it was just like, if you're within the modeling industry, it's a lot like the art industry during that period, riddled with mafia, intelligence, and people who were throwing money all around the place. If you want to launder money, buying 15 fur coats is a really good way of laundering money.
Yeah. And then you also have obviously Jean-Luc Brunel, who is obviously in the French kind of model agency. And, you know, going back to what you said, again, I agree, you know, just because it has Israeli connections doesn't mean it's one big Mossad thing. But he obviously has a picture with Jeffrey Epstein. He's either with him or he's on the plane. He's got an IDF hat on, obviously Israel. And obviously, like Jeffrey Epstein, who killed himself in his prison cell, you also had Jean-Luc Brunel, who was found killed himself in his prison cell in Paris. I mean, there's been a lot of people who have popped up dead in this. I mean, you have the old Clinton aide, who I can't remember his name, who introduced one of the people who kind of introduced Epstein to Bill Clinton during the White House, who was found hanging from a tree. And
Mark Middleton.
Yeah, Mark Middleton, that's it. And he not only tried to hang himself, he'd shoot himself in the chest with a shotgun. And I mean, even if he wasn't hanging yourself, shooting yourself in the chest with a shotgun would be very difficult. It's quite, you know, imagine like you're quite long away and you're choking, and then he's like, I've
imagined it a few times. I mean, it's comedy. It's comedy to hang yourself and shoot yourself in the chest. I mean, you
with a shotgun, not just, you know, not hang, it's just
massive
ridiculous.
Message. Guy can't get off the party boat, and it's the end of the line for him. End of the line. He's the one who took Epstein to meet Clinton 17 times in the first 2 years. 17 times. First 2 years Bill Clinton's in office. That is, I mean, people don't realize what Epstein was. They get so distracted by so much of the sex, they don't realize he was the kingmaker. You know, kings, they crave for things. You know, that's why it's important to make sure that you got the things that they crave. So he was already had those things, but he was a kingmaker, working right at the top.
Yeah, no, again, I'll put this up on the screen, but you can find these photos of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell in the White House in the 90s. This isn't speculation. You can look at the pictures. You know, it's like, again, you always think they must have met later. Like, no way Jeffrey Epstein knew Bill Clinton while he was president. Well, there's a photo of him in the White House. There you go. That's right there. And one of the people who introduced them now has a shotgun bullet to the chest while hanging from a tree, and it was ruled a suicide. Some other people who came up dead. I mean, obviously, there's been the cases with the banks at the moment, with JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, who obviously settling. And if you people remember originally with the Deutsche Bank case, one of the judges, her husband and son one of them was killed and one of them was shot. And then the person who did
proper hit as well.
And then the person who did that and again, you can find this all open source on you know, mainstream media. The person who apparently, you know, killed the son and I think shot the husband was found that he killed himself. So there's just so many. There's probably some more deaths in there. I think there was someone else. They're just swimming around. All these people coming up there now. Bill Richards in Mexico, and of course Jeffrey Epstein had that ranch in New Mexico. He's now dead. Whether he actually was killed, I'm not sure. He was a big fat guy. Maybe he had a heart attack, or whatever it may have been. What did you make of the New Mexico ranch? Because that was that. I've heard Jason Berman say it. I haven't actually checked myself because we never really hear about it. Was it actually investigated like the FBI did with his place in New York and obviously the islands?
No, it was a Zorro Ranch is a very hard one. It was a really big project to take on, and they did a load of work on it, but they were looking well into the future with that. And so by the time that the operation starts to get revealed to or investigated by the FBI is 2004, 2005, and they've only had the ranch for 6-7 years. So they managed to do a load of work on it, develop it up. The house increased probably by, I think, about double in that time, but it was always a project that was ongoing, and there's loads of rumors of what's meant to be there, and it was really meant to focus on Jeffrey Epstein's scientific endeavors, which range from just co-opting every scientist around to having babies in jars that all look like Epstein. I mean, the rumors are and some of those rumors again spread by the same people who is like, oh, then what does that mean, what's true or what's not, because I don't like someone or I know that they've told lies in another case, I can't discount it fully. There was obviously weird stuff going on, and he had a weird science mind going on as well. So I think Zorro is a really hard one to work out. Again, Bill Richardson was the governor of New Mexico at the time when they started Zorro Ranch, and it was very clever. I can't remember. I think it was his father who owned the land, or was it? I can't remember anyway. But when they bought it, it's the biggest ranch in New Mexico, and Bill Richardson was likely to be next to the king eventually, because he was seen as a very good potential future politician, maybe even presidential candidate. He actually then, when Al Gore was running, they had to decide between the vice president, and it was either going to be Lieberman or Richardson. And because of Richardson's many scandals by that point, they chose, and his involvement in Monica Lewinsky affair, they chose Lieberman instead. But again, his association with Bill Richardson doesn't only make sense for the fact that he's basing his weird part of his operation in New Mexico, and Bill Richardson is extremely corrupt, but Bill Richardson is with these elite, is up there with the elites of the Democratic Party, and he was a Democrat kingmaker. That's what Epstein is. So Bill Richardson, that his relationship there, I think, makes a lot more sense when you work out that also he was given to Lieberman's campaign. We know that as well. We know now from the drops a couple of the things that I didn't know before. Al Gore was definitely at the island with his wife. So that's not, Al Gore's not having sex with children on there. He's the most boring man in the world who, he goes there with his extremely boring wife. And of course, man, you go to a nice island in Virgin Islands, you'd be like, wow, this is nice. I'm going to have a lovely holiday, So lots of people went with that sort of thing in mind. But if you look at it, then he's meeting with Gore and he's funding Lieberman and Richardson. He's spreading his bets over who's going to get the Democratic nomination. Later on, he's still at this point funding Kerry. John Kerry will be the next potential candidate for president and go up against George Bush. And of course, he's funding him up until 2002, Epstein is. And I reckon he may have been one of the ones who were Foxcoat House, one of the senators. I'd love to find out. One day, well. But John Kerry's really important to that story too. And then you look at the other people that he was obviously supporting. Well, his connections with Bill Clinton is one, but another one was RFK Jr. So RFK Jr. I had an argument with someone the other day, yesterday I think it was even, on X, who said that basically I wasn't right. RFK Jr. and Epstein weren't friends, and he had flown on the Lolita Express twice. Once was to go fossil hunting, and once was to meet his mum, and Epstein wasn't even there. Well, in actual fact, the one time in 1994, we know they went out together and they were doing buddy things, because we got a picture of them at the New York Academy of Art sitting around the same table in the same ball during the two flights where they fly backwards and forwards. So you can already tell that there's lies coming from the RFK Jr. camp, and there was loads of rumors, lots of rumors. And again, those are rumors. But the housekeeper also made it clear that RFK Jr. had come round to House on a number of occasions, and he was likely to be a future Democratic presidential candidate, which we've seen sort of develop, but then he's gone over to independent. But I reckon in 4 years and 8 years' time, you're more likely to see an RFK Jr. presidency. And he was always looking in the future. You know, Epstein was always looking at who's going to be the king in the future, because I'm going to have to work with this person as the position I am, which is, I believe, a fixer, CIA sort of. I don't think he's a recruiter. I think people know who he is. They know what role he plays. They get on his plane knowing this, and they know what they're doing there. They're dealing with something that's operational most of the time, and he has to be in line with the top players in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has to give opportunities to these different big players so that they can make a name for themselves and become top level, and then they know who is going to be top level. So I think that's a lot of the reason why people like Richardson and stuff was around, because they were all linked up with the fact that he was a kingmaker.
Am I correct that Bill Richardson sat on the board at one time of Genie Energy, who at different times had Rupert Murdoch, one of the Rothschilds, and a few other heavy hitters, you know, ex-CI director, I think, Woolsey. Didn't he sit on the board of Genie Energy, who also drilled, I think, if I'm correct, into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights in Syria? Did he sit on the board of Genie Energy?
I don't know, but I I don't know about that one, and I like the sound of it. It sounds good.
I'll check after. And yeah, I guess just as we've hit around an hour, I'd love to have you on again to go into some of the characters you mentioned in detail. This has been a good kind of, I guess, overview, but I guess just to sum up, who was Jeffrey Epstein and what was his operation? Because obviously you've done your own research, spoken to different people, looked at it from different angles, worked from different people. Everyone has their own ideas, because there has to be an element of speculation due to the lack of, you know, information and accountability in this case. So, you know, are you steering less away from it was just pure him, you know, filming other people and blackmailing that way? There may be an element of that, because obviously he has hard drives, CDs, binders, obviously full of some sort of information that then, if there was nothing on the binders, they would have released it. You know, if there's nothing to hide, you'd normally think, let's release it. So who do you think Jeffrey Epstein was, and what did he do? You've obviously mentioned he's a bit of a fixer. Obviously, you lean more towards CIA, and obviously the Mossad as well. So who do you think he was? What was he doing? What was kind of the network around him? What was the operation, I guess?
Okay, I think he had many different roles throughout his career and throughout his life. I think he was spotted quite early as being able to swim amongst the sharks. His Dalton School stuff is going into banking. It seems like a sort of a contrived intelligence sort of cover that they didn't even put too much effort into, because they knew he would probably be running deep operations. And like I say, by the 80s and early 80s, he's funding and running guns and starting to really get into the banking while it's booming. And that just seems to be, they're making loads of money off these operations, intelligence operations, and they're just, oh, look, we're bankers and we got loads of money all of a sudden, you know, and that's kind of a lot of what they're doing. But at the same time, he's at this point is a good front as being a financial man, and he was really useful for the intelligence services, and he was able to get out of sticky situations. That we know from Tower Financials as well, with Hoffenberg, that it was Stephen Hoffenberg who gets prosecuted, does a jail time for that, while Epstein gets out. So he was obviously a very slippery fish with very good, like, high up friends. But then in the late 80s, he becomes something else. He becomes high level. At this point, he's proven himself through many operations. He can get away with it. He can handle people's money. And a lot of these people are using money that really isn't their money. money. They've got it from tax avoidance, or they got it from ripping people off, or they got it from stealing or smuggling or something along those lines. So he's dealing with that sort of money. I think the majority of his work in the 80s that gets him so famous is moving money around and being a money man for in various intelligence operations to handle that sort of stuff. And after a certain amount of time, he becomes so super trusted and gets in with these people who then the operation becomes something different. So the operation becomes not a just simple, oh, let's blackmail this guy and put cameras up everywhere. I think the developing of cameras as compromise was a very, an obvious route for them to go, and would be one string on a very, very large harp full of strings, a double-stringed harp. There was so many operations he was doing, and so the 90s operation, what we see expand from 1990, he buys his Palm Beach house of hell, and then he slowly buys properties all afterwards in different areas where he basically looks like he's running the East Coast for the CIA. That's how I've described it at base terms for people. At this point in the 90s and the early noughties, he's put in charge of operations that are run by people who will potentially be head of the Democratic Party, and making sure that he's in with these people for if they need them for anything. And a lot of that is actually, even though that people don't like me saying this, quite innocent. It's quite just, see, I say innocent, but I say it's quotation marks. It's CIA doing their operations, and this person is handling this bit and this person is handling this bit. So at this point, he's like running multiple schemes. By the early noughties, he's going around, like, for instance, Africa and Asia with Bill Clinton, meeting all these big leaders, business leaders, and he's not compromising them. Or what he's doing is looking for business opportunities to create more wealth, so that they've got more funds to run operations. And then by later on, he's run himself into the ground so much he's basically a banker who can't run big operations out in the open anymore, but he can fix still for people, and he can invest in tech, and that's what he does later on. So post 2004, 2005, once he's outed as, oh, there's a court case going, then he just concentrates on tech, and that he's got like aspirations. He's got like, his eyes are too big for his belly, so he's looking for everything. He's looking basically to become the guy who's going to live forever at that point, and that leads eventually to his death. So he was a couple of things for his life, but mainly he was an intelligence interlocutor and financer. That's what I'd say.
So yeah, obviously different parts of his career, he could be doing different things at different eras, pre-internet, and then pre-getting outed as a registered sex offender, and then becoming more known. Because the thing about Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of people don't even know he was arrested that first time. And you can find countless articles between his first arrest and his second arrest talking about his connections to people, where you can find out that, and then there's no way they can say they didn't know as well, because this was already all public. And just, I guess, one last question before you just let people know where to find your work. Again, I'll put it on the screen, the show notes. What does this case tell us about how the world is run, or the US justice system? The fact that, the pure, obviously, lack of accountability, and also just the, what it tell people about our society, that when the Ghislaine Maxwell case was going on, people was more focused on Johnny Depp and whoever her name was being all over Instagram, social media, whether that was artificially boosted. You'd probably assume so, considering the timing. But what does this case tell about how, I guess, the system works within, the countries around the US, the UK, Israel, wherever it may be? What does it tell us about our system of government, or whatever else you want to say?
Yeah, there's a lot of co-opting involved in our system of government, and our system of government is basically influencers influencing, just like we're seeing in the internet world. It's people who have got some sort of sway over somebody else, pushing them to do something that somebody else has paid them to get them to do. And so that's kind of like how the what Shiva calls the swarm works. You know, they push each other into the directions and they both make profits. I think what this whole case shows us is that every time we are going to approach something that is intelligence linked to big players, Hunter Biden level, Jeffrey Epstein level, that the intelligence agents will be the counsel, the intelligence agents will be the judge, the intelligence agents will be the jailer, the intelligence agents will be the guards sleeping outside the door, and the intelligence agents will be the ones strangling Jeffrey Epstein in his cell to shut him up. The intelligence agents will take control of our legal system whenever it is necessary for them to do so, or they see it as necessary, and they wait a long time to do that, but they do it slowly and they do it brazenly. And if you look at the Epstein case itself and the development, the two cases, the first case was completely and utterly riddled by intelligence, completely and utterly controversially, still even at the time, a complete and he's let off basically, and he should have been serving multiple life sentences for grooming and molesting. 8,000 plus case counts, at least, if you just count 10 years, with all the other stuff, but completely let off. So the what it tells us is that the second case, don't think it's any different. Look at the actors involved. Look at Boris and how he's involved in Theranos. He's involved in this. One of the lawyers for Epstein's victims, and Boris, one of the head lawyers. He's like involved in the Theranos case, the blood sampling case where Henry Kissinger was on the board of the company. He's Harvey Weinstein. He actually he represented Harvey Weinstein. He actually was the one who worked on behalf of the federal government looking into Towers, Drexel Burnham Lambert collapse, one of the biggest financial collapses ever. He was the guy behind defending Gore, or prosecuting for Gore with the hanging chads. He's the guy who's the Bill Gates antitrust case to build his legacy and build his name so he could do all of these operations afterwards. Look at Pottinger, who's next to him, CIA all of his life, involved in signing off Watergate, the assassination on Martin Luther King, running guns with Jeffrey Epstein during Iran-Contra, you know, getting COINTELPRO domestic surveillance for CIA, and his best mate, George H.W. Bush. Look at Bradley Edwards' own words, Relentless Pursuit, his book in 2020, where he calls Stanley Pottinger the Winston Wolf, the CIA man, the 007. The cases are completely riddled. We have no justice. The Justice Department, that's a place where people go to learn how to be mafia. The FBI, that's a place where people go to learn how to fit people up. The CIA, that's the place where people go to learn how to kill people. You know, these organizations leave us with no justice. It's going to keep repeating until we change the systems completely. And people who say that out loud usually end up with something like hanging from a tree with a shotgun wound to the chest, and they call it suicide. So at the end of the day, these guys, they're in charge. They show us they're in charge. If you look close enough, you see their sharp teeth glinting in the light and their smug smile on their face and the little sign around them saying, "We did it," because they are so proud of what they do, and they know they will not be held to account. They walk into special rooms surrounded by their own friends and their own mates, and they are untouchables. They are the untouchables. So that's what it tells me. It tells me that when you look at a case like that, you never see the case. You're dealing with the untouchables. Everybody who you know the name of, then they're a liar. If you know their name and they're involved, don't trust them at all. That's what my opinion is.
And just thinking of smug faces, the best one is Bill Barr when he's getting interviewed. He was the Justice Department head of the Justice Department during the Jeffrey Epstein saga, where obviously he kills himself, and the guy asks for the straight face to Bill Barr, "Is this, you know, you're going to do a better job of keeping Ghislaine Maxwell from doing that?" And they both burst out laughing. No joke. I'll cue the clip after this. in post editing, they'd literally start laughing. Like he's smiling during the question, and he can't help but just burst out laughing. And the guy him just starts laughing as well. It was just a big fat joke. It's so funny. I mean, it's funny, just it's ridiculous. But and then also a good one to remember for people to say, these people might not have known, is Cindy McCain, John McCain's wife. She's doing she's in an interview, like a conference type thing people are watching, and she talks about how everyone knew about Jeffrey Epstein, but they was too scared to fight.
How are players a priority for us right now? Can we even touch them? Or is this a pipe dream that we need to address in the future somehow?
It's like everything. It hides in plain sight. Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing. But we had no one that was, legal aspect that would go after him. They were afraid of him. For whatever reason, they were afraid of him. All of a sudden, someone said, BS. We're not afraid of you anymore, and what you're doing is not only wrong, it's illegal, it's, all those things. It's like a house of cards now. It's going to start tumbling, believe me. And these guys.
But doesn't, forget the fact that her husband was almost president in 2008, and forget he was one of the biggest, senators around, always palling around with Lindsey Graham, looking for the next war. I mean, if he was here right now, he'd be begging for the US to bomb Iran. But apparently that doesn't have enough sway to go against Jeffrey Epstein. Well, what does that tell you, for one? If she's saying that, why can't you take him on? Who's backing him? And apparently everyone knew. But I'd like to thank you for coming on. Really enjoyed talking to you. I'd love to have you on again and just get into more specific on your research. So I know this was more general and you've probably spoken about it before. So I'm happy next time just to go more into kind of what you've researched yourself and what you found out. But appreciate you coming on. Do you just want to let people know where to find your work? I'll put it on the screen and I'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, you can find my work on newspaste.com and johnnyvedmore.com, and those are my two main places. You'll find me on YouTube, Rockfin, Rumble, on Twitter. Nearly everything I'm under Johnny Vedmore, so I'm under my own name. And there's loads. I need help. I need support. I need everybody to help. I can push out loads of work on johnnyvedmore.com. You look at the drop-down menu of the featured articles, look at some of my work, go listen to the read-throughs, watch Newspasty, see the Newspaste podcast. I promise you there's loads for everybody to take in, and I'll keep doing it, and as long as people keep asking questions and keep being interested, because I can't stop it. A bit obsessed, to be honest.
It is obsessive, these types of topics, but I'll leave it there. Again, thanks for coming on, and hope to speak soon.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.